One of the things that we all might need to do is to stop thinking of ourselves as collectors and to start thinking of ourselves as a small business. If you are buying and selling comics, you might need to make some changes. The reality is that the recent law change that the IRS has put in place to require platforms like PayPal and Venmo to report any income above $600 is going to force us to make some changes. You cannot think of yourself just as a collector if you're buying and selling. You have to start thinking like a business owner. Over the last few weeks and months, I've seen a lot of complaining online regarding the recent change by the IRS to require apps like PayPal and Venmo to report any earnings above $600. And I've kind of stayed out of the fray, and I've done so on purpose because we as people need to go through the stages of change from denial all the way through to acceptance. And I think now we are on the other side of that, and people are accepting the fact that this is real and is going to happen. And I think at this point, maybe people are ready to hear some tips and pointers that will help put them in a position to do things right. The truth of the matter is that this law, this change, does not impact what you are going to file this year. It does, however, impact any earnings that you would accumulate over the course of 2022, leading into you filing your taxes in 2023. And so to that point, I want to talk about some practical tips and pointers that may help you. One thing to keep in mind is that I am not a CPA. I am not an accountant. And so I'm going to give you some things to think about, but you should actually seek out your own tax advice to make sure that the recommendations and things that I'm talking about actually make sense for you. One of the first things that I want to talk about is structure. And you will have to decide with your attorney and or with your CPA what structure actually makes the most sense for you. If you are occasionally buying and selling a comic here or there, you might not need structure, but if you're moving some volume, then you might need some kind of legal entity put in place. Again, you want to definitely talk to your own advisors to figure out what might make sense. My structure is a little complicated, and it might just be because of the nature of who I am and who my wife is, but we have some structure in place. So Regie Collects is the entity that I use to create content. There's a podcast, there's a website, there's a YouTube channel, there's also a couple of trademarks that are owned, if you will, by Regie Collects. Regie Collects is owned by an LLC that I formed many years ago called Fit Bodies. That LLC provides me with a little bit of legal structure and also some coverage. And again, I'm not an attorney, but there's some protection there as an LLC. That LLC is nested into a trust. So I actually have a family trust that a lot of my assets, if you will, are deposited into. The trust is driven by the will that we put in place. And if you want to talk about some morbid stuff, sit down and create a will with an attorney and with your significant other. That is some morbid stuff. But we did this several years ago, the will that is, in order to dictate what happens with the assets that my wife and I own. It provides me with a little protection to ensure that if I leave this earth, that my wife and my children will be taken care of. Again, my structure is a little complicated, but potentially not something that your average person would need, but I wanted to offer it up for context. The second tip that I want to offer up is something that I've spoken about repeatedly in various videos for the last couple of years. I would encourage you to set up separate accounts related to comics and collectibles. Separate accounts entirely, and there are a host of different ways to do this. I actually have a PayPal account that is dedicated just to comics and collectibles. When I buy and sell comics, the money goes right into PayPal. I have a PayPal debit card, so when I go to the LCS to make purchases, I use the PayPal debit card to actually complete that transaction. In addition to that, I actually have a savings account as well. And so when I have surplus funds that I want to move out of PayPal, I plug them into a savings account that is FDIC insured, because it's my understanding that PayPal is not FDIC insured. And so I do not hold large sums of money there. There have also been some problems with some YouTubers having their funds seized in PayPal, so I don't want to do that. So I have this separate savings account where I actually will move money to, and if necessary, move money out of back to PayPal to make certain transactions. I am debating whether I also want a checking account. Not quite sure that I need that, but that is something that is in the back of my mind. In addition to this, I actually have a credit card that is in the name of Regie Collects. The reason that I have that credit card is because I've had to make some large purchases that exceeded the limit of what the PayPal debit card would allow. So I actually have, from the same bank where I have my savings account, a credit card that I can actually use when I have to make big purchases, like printing a collectible guide, for example. I do not use the credit card to purchase comics. I only use cash, either from the PayPal account or from the savings account, to actually buy comics. So I want to definitely clarify that. You'll have to decide if separate accounts makes sense for you. But what I will tell you is that at the end of the year, when it comes time to tally up what money came in and what money went out, running a couple of searches and reports within PayPal or your checking or savings account is much easier than trying to remember your different purchases and different sources of income when they are spread across multiple personal accounts with all kinds of other transactions for like food and rent or mortgages and car washes and gas and all that other kind of stuff. By having the separate accounts, it makes it much easier to figure out where the money went and where the money actually came from. In addition to that, having separate accounts works incredibly well if you have a significant other. When I buy and sell comics, it all goes through PayPal, and my wife does not have the visibility into that. And that's not because I'm hiding something. It's just simply because she doesn't care and she doesn't want to see it. But if she saw large amounts of money actually going out, she might have a couple of questions. So the separate accounts allows me to keep things clean and harmonious in my house, and might also be of benefit to you as well. The third tip that I want to offer is to make sure that you are tracking your expenses and your income as well. And one of the things that I think a lot of folks are not thinking about is that you only pay taxes on the income that is left after expenses have been paid. So to illustrate this, let's say that you buy a book for $200. You sell that book for $500. You are only going to pay taxes on $300 because that is what is left over based upon the purchase price at $200. Now, when it comes to that $300, again, if you have some expenses that you are capturing, like bags and boards, like shipping, like a CGC membership, because you sent that book off to be graded and encapsulated and all that kind of stuff, it may actually reduce your income from $300 down to maybe $100 that you are actually paying, because that is your true income. My point here is that you want to make sure that you are tracking what you're buying, what you're spending, what you're selling things for, because at the end of the day, that information will be incredibly helpful when it comes time to pay taxes. So the fourth tip that I want to offer up is to set aside some money for taxes just in case. So in the previous example, I cited that your reportable income might be $100. You may want to set aside part of that $100 for the end of the year come tax season. And I won't tell you how much to set aside because I honestly don't know, but this is something that you may want to think about. The last thing you want is that $100 burning a hole in your pocket. You get the FOMO, you spend all $100, but maybe your record keeping isn't where you need it to be, and you forget where and how you actually spent that $100, and now you have to report that $100 income that isn't really $100 worth of income. My point here is that you just want to be careful about what you're doing, and you may want to set aside some money for a rainy day. So the final tip that I want to offer up is to not let the IRS requirements nor anything that I've said in this video to deter you from enjoying this hobby. Yes, you might need to think about yourself as a business versus just as a collector that is enjoying this hobby, but do not let the red tape. Do not let these requirements, do not let any of this deter you from continuing to enjoy this hobby. Because again, it is a wonderful hobby, but as you know, if there is money to be made, Uncle Sam wants his part. So do a couple of things, put some things in place that will allow you to give Uncle Sam what he deserves and requires of you, while simultaneously continuing to enjoy this hobby for the many things that it offers. With that said, I'm going to wrap this video up. I hope that you guys enjoyed it. And if you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, I want to encourage you to do so now. If you are much more knowledgeable about tax law and some of the other stuff that I touched on in this video, I want to encourage you to leave those thoughts behind in the comment section as well, so that we can all benefit from your expertise and knowledge. If you need to reach out to me for some reason, feel free to do so on Instagram at Regie Collects. Take care.